In a small town in Argentina, 1960, neighbors whispered about the quiet man who ran the local mechanic shop. He kept to himself, spoke Spanish with a strange accent, and never talked about his past. What they didn't know was that this unassuming mechanic had once been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. His real name wasn't Ricardo Klement, it was Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust. He wasn't alone. Across South America, hundreds of Nazi war criminals had melted into new lives, new identities, and new communities. Some became respected businessmen. Others found refuge in remote villages. A few even worked for intelligence agencies. But the question that haunted the post-war world was simple. What happened to these men when they thought they had escaped justice forever? The answer is more complex and disturbing than most people realize. The escape networks that spirited Nazi war criminals out of Europe weren't improvised. They were calculated operations that began while the war was still raging. But what's truly shocking is who helped them disappear. When Allied forces closed in on Berlin in April 1945, panic swept through Nazi Germany. High-ranking officials, SS officers, and concentration camp commanders knew exactly what awaited them if captured. While some chose to end their lives rather than face justice, thousands of others made a different choice. They ran. The escape routes were already in place. During the final months of the war, Nazi intelligence had established what historians now call rat lines, secret networks designed to smuggle war criminals out of Europe. These weren't hastily thrown together escape plans. They were sophisticated operations involving forged documents, safe houses, and corrupt officials spanning multiple countries. The most famous of these routes led through Italy to South America. Vatican officials, whether knowingly or unknowingly, provided crucial assistance. Monsignor Alois Hudal, an Austrian bishop with Nazi sympathies, personally helped hundreds of SS officers obtain false papers and passage to Argentina. The Vatican's Refugee Commission, originally created to help legitimate war victims, became a pipeline for war criminals. Franz Stangl, commandant of the Treblinka death camp, where an estimated 900,000 people were murdered, walked into a Catholic monastery in Rome in 1947. He emerged with a Red Cross passport under a false name and boat passage to Syria. From there, he made his way to Brazil, where he would live freely for 20 years. The priest who helped him later claimed he had no idea who Stangl really was, but documents suggest otherwise. Gustav Wagner, known as the Beast for his cruelty at Sobibor death camp, followed a similar route. After spending time in a monastery, he obtained false papers identifying him as an Italian refugee. He sailed to Brazil in 1950 and established himself as a farmer. Local authorities knew his true identity, but chose to ignore it for decades. But here's what makes this story even more unsettling. Many of these escapes happened with the knowledge and sometimes assistance of Allied intelligence services. The Cold War was beginning, and both American and British agencies decided that some Nazi expertise might be useful against the Soviet Union. Operation Paperclip brought Nazi scientists to America. Other programs quietly relocated intelligence officers and technical experts to new positions in the West. Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon, tortured and murdered resistance fighters during his time as Gestapo chief in occupied France. After the war, American intelligence recruited him as an anti-communist asset. When French authorities demanded his extradition, the Americans helped smuggle Barbie to Bolivia instead. He would live there freely for nearly 4 decades. The American Counterintelligence Corps paid Barbie a monthly salary and provided him with false documents. They relocated his family and gave him a new identity. In return, Barbie provided intelligence on communist activities in Europe and later in South America. The arrangement was so secretive that even other American agencies weren't aware of his protected status. Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief intelligence officer on the Eastern Front, surrendered to American forces with a remarkable offer. He claimed to have extensive knowledge of Soviet military capabilities and offered to work for the Americans. Not only was he hired, but he was allowed to recruit many of his former Nazi intelligence colleagues. The Gehlen organization became a crucial part of American intelligence operations in Europe, employing hundreds of former Nazi officers. What happened next in Argentina defies belief. Entire Nazi communities thrived in plain sight, protected by a government that welcomed them with open arms. Argentina became the premier destination for fleeing Nazis, and this wasn't by accident. President Juan Perón actively courted Nazi immigration, seeing it as a way to gain technical expertise and educated immigrants for his developing nation. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate that between 5,000 and 10,000 Nazi war criminals found refuge in Argentina alone. These weren't just low-level functionaries trying to disappear. Major war criminals established entire communities in Argentina. They built German schools, founded businesses, and created networks that would protect each other for decades. In some regions, German became the predominant language. Nazi symbols appeared in private clubs and social gatherings, though carefully hidden from public view. The Hotel Tirol in Bariloche became an unofficial headquarters for the Nazi exile community. Former SS officers would meet there regularly, sharing stories of the war and coordinating business ventures. The hotel's guest registry read like a who's who of Nazi war criminals. Local police knew about these gatherings, but never interfered. Josef Mengele, the notorious Auschwitz doctor who conducted horrific medical experiments on prisoners, lived openly in Buenos Aires for years. He used his real name, socialized with other German expatriates, and even practiced medicine. Local German hospitals employed him despite his background being well known within the community. The Argentine government showed no interest in investigating or extraditing him. Mengele's comfortable life in Buenos Aires included a modern apartment, membership in exclusive clubs, and a thriving medical practice. He treated wealthy German expatriates and even performed surgery at local hospitals. His patients included other Nazi fugitives who trusted him because of their shared background. The German hospital in Buenos Aires employed him for several years, despite receiving anonymous tips about his true identity. But the most shocking case was Adolf Eichmann himself. As the logistics coordinator for the Holocaust, Eichmann had organized the transportation of millions of Jews to concentration camps. After escaping to Argentina in 1950, he lived under the name Ricardo Klement and worked various jobs while maintaining contact with other Nazi exiles. He felt so secure that he began using his real name again in German community circles. Eichmann's family joined him in Argentina, and they lived in a modest house in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. His sons attended German schools and were raised with Nazi ideology. Eichmann worked at a Mercedes-Benz factory and later started a small business. Neighbors knew him as a quiet, hard-working man who kept to himself. They had no idea they were living next to one of history's most wanted war criminals. The Nazi community in Argentina wasn't just about hiding. It was about continuing their ideology. Secret meetings were held where attendees would share memories of the Third Reich and express hopes for its eventual restoration. Some established businesses that employed only Germans. Walter Kutschmann, a former SS officer responsible for mass murders in Poland, became a successful businessman in Buenos Aires. He owned several companies and employed dozens of people, most of them German expatriates. His business partners knew his background, but chose to ignore it. Kutschmann lived openly under his real name, and even gave interviews to German-language newspapers in Argentina. Gerhard Bohne, who had organized the Nazi euthanasia program that killed thousands of disabled individuals, established a medical practice in Buenos Aires. He continued his interest in eugenics, writing articles for German medical journals about population control and genetic superiority. Local authorities received complaints about his activities, but never investigated. The comfortable existence of these war criminals couldn't last forever. Around the world, groups of Nazi hunters were organizing, determined to bring these men to justice. The most famous was Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor who dedicated his life to tracking down war criminals. But he wasn't working alone. Wiesenthal operated from a cramped office in Vienna, surviving on donations and driven by an obsession with justice. He maintained files on thousands of suspected war criminals and corresponded with survivors, government officials, and fellow hunters around the world. His methods were meticulous. He would spend years building cases, gathering evidence, and tracking down witnesses. Israeli intelligence services, particularly the Mossad, made Nazi hunting a top priority. The capture of Adolf Eichmann in 1960 sent shockwaves through the Nazi exile community worldwide. Mossad agents had located Eichmann in suburban Buenos Aires, conducting months of surveillance before snatching him off the street and smuggling him back to Israel for trial. The operation required forged documents, safe houses, and a carefully planned extraction that involved drugging Eichmann and smuggling him onto an Israeli airliner. The international incident that followed Eichmann's capture revealed how deeply Argentina had been compromised by Nazi influence. Argentine officials demanded his return, claiming his kidnapping violated their sovereignty. Mengele fled Argentina for Paraguay immediately after hearing of Eichmann's capture. He destroyed documents, abandoned his medical practice, and disappeared into the jungle. His comfortable life in Buenos Aires was over, replaced by years of paranoia and constant movement between safe houses. But the pressure was mounting from multiple directions. West Germany, initially reluctant to pursue war criminals, began more aggressive prosecution efforts in the 1960s. The famous Frankfurt Auschwitz trials put concentration camp guards and officers on public trial, creating international attention and pressure to find other perpetrators. The German prosecutor Fritz Bauer was instrumental in these efforts. Despite facing resistance from former Nazis who had infiltrated the German justice system, Bauer pursued war criminals relentlessly. He secretly cooperated with Israeli intelligence and provided crucial information that led to Eichmann's capture. His efforts in Germany resulted in dozens of prosecutions and helped change public attitudes about Nazi crimes. Some Nazi exiles made fatal mistakes that exposed them. In 1979, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina began protesting the disappearance of their children under the military dictatorship. Their investigations accidentally uncovered connections between former Nazis and the Argentine security forces. Klaus Barbie's name surfaced in documents, leading to his eventual extradition to France in 1983. The discovery of Barbie's activities in Bolivia shocked the international community. Not only had he been living freely under his own name, but he had been working with the Bolivian military and intelligence services. His expertise in torture and interrogation had been put to use against political dissidents and suspected communists. The revelation that American intelligence had originally helped him escape to Bolivia created a diplomatic crisis. Beate Klarsfeld, a German journalist married to a French Holocaust survivor, became one of the most effective Nazi hunters of the 1970s. She used dramatic publicity stunts to expose war criminals, including slapping German Chancellor Kurt Georg Kiesinger in public to protest his Nazi past. Her relentless campaigns forced governments to take action against war criminals they had previously ignored. The most disturbing revelation was yet to come. These weren't just war criminals in hiding, they were actively spreading their methods of terror across an entire continent. The story takes an even darker turn when we examine how many escaped Nazis found new careers with South American dictatorships. Their expertise in repression, torture, and population control made them valuable assets to military governments throughout the region. In Chile, Walter Rauff, inventor of mobile gas chambers used in the Holocaust, became an advisor to Augusto Pinochet's secret police. His knowledge of mass execution techniques was applied to the regime's campaign against political opponents. Hundreds of Chileans were murdered, using methods Rauff had refined during his time in Nazi Germany. Rauff had escaped to Syria after the war, where he worked for the government before moving to Ecuador and eventually Chile. In Chile, he established a successful business importing industrial equipment, while secretly advising the military on intelligence operations. When Pinochet took power in 1973, Rauff's expertise became invaluable to the new regime. The mobile gas chambers Rauff had designed for the Holocaust were adapted for use in Chile's detention centers. Prisoners were murdered using carbon monoxide poisoning, a method Rauff had perfected decades earlier. The techniques were so effective that other South American militaries requested training from Chilean security forces, spreading Rauff's methods across the continent. Bolivia's military dictatorship employed multiple former Nazi officers in its intelligence services. Klaus Barbie became a key figure in the regime's counterinsurgency operations, training local officers in interrogation techniques he had used against French resistance fighters. His methods were brutal and effective, earning him protected status within the government. Barbie established a school for torture in Bolivia, where he trained military officers from across South America. Barbie's reputation as an expert in counterinsurgency made him one of the most sought-after instructors in Latin America. His methods were so successful that he was consulted by military governments facing insurgencies throughout the 1970s. But perhaps the most disturbing collaboration occurred in Paraguay under dictator Alfredo Stroessner. The country became a haven for the most wanted Nazi war criminals, who in exchange for protection provided expertise in surveillance, torture, and population control. Dr. Mengele spent years in Paraguay, where he continued conducting unauthorized medical experiments, this time on indigenous populations. Stroessner's government actively recruited former Nazis, offering them citizenship, land, and business opportunities in exchange for their services. The arrangement was so extensive that entire regions of Paraguay became German-speaking enclaves populated by war criminals and their families. Mengele's activities in Paraguay were particularly horrific. He conducted medical experiments on indigenous children, sterilized women without their consent, and used prisoners as test subjects for pharmaceutical research. Local doctors were forced to assist him, and those who refused faced imprisonment or death. The Mennonite communities in Paraguay, originally established by peaceful religious refugees, became infiltrated by former Nazis who used the communities as cover for their activities. These criminals exploited the community's isolation and religious beliefs to avoid detection while continuing their research into racial purity and population control. These collaborations weren't just about individual criminals finding protection. They represented the institutionalization of Nazi methods within new political systems. Techniques developed for the Holocaust were adapted for use against political dissidents, indigenous peoples, and anyone else deemed undesirable by military regimes. The human cost was enormous. Thousands of Latin Americans were murdered, tortured, or disappeared, using methods perfected by Nazi war criminals. The expertise these men brought with them extended the reach of their crimes far beyond the Holocaust itself. Friedrich Schwend, a former SS officer who had counterfeited British currency during the war, became a key figure in Peru's intelligence services. He used his expertise in forgery and financial manipulation to fund covert operations against leftist groups. His network extended throughout South America, providing financing for military operations and assassination campaigns. Hans Ulrich Rudel, Germany's most decorated pilot, became an advisor to Argentine military aviation. He helped establish training programs and procurement networks that strengthened the military's capabilities against internal dissent. His influence extended to Chile and Paraguay, where he helped modernize Air Force operations. John Demjanjuk's case illustrates how complex these pursuits became. Initially identified as Ivan the Terrible, a brutal guard at Treblinka death camp, Demjanjuk was extradited from the United States to Israel in 1986. However, evidence later suggested he might have been a different person entirely. After years of legal battles, he was eventually deported to Germany, where he was convicted of being an accessory to murder at Sobibor death camp. He died in 2012 while appealing his conviction. The Demjanjuk case revealed how difficult it had become to prosecute Nazi war criminals decades after their crimes. Witnesses had died, evidence had been lost, and memories had faded. Defense attorneys argued that their elderly clients were too frail to stand trial, while prosecutors struggled to prove specific acts of murder committed 50 years earlier. Oskar Gröning, known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, lived openly in Germany for decades after the war. He worked as a bookkeeper and later spoke publicly about his experiences, initially to counter Holocaust denial. However, in 2015, at age 94, he was finally prosecuted and convicted as an accessory to murder. His trial was one of the last major Nazi war crimes prosecutions. Gröning's case represented a shift in legal thinking about Nazi crimes. Instead of requiring proof of specific murders, prosecutors argued that anyone who had facilitated the functioning of death camps was guilty of accessory to murder. This approach allowed for prosecutions, even when specific crimes couldn't be proven. The pursuit of Nazi war criminals continued well into the 21st century. Operation Last Chance, launched by the Simon Wiesenthal Center in 2002, aimed to prosecute the remaining living perpetrators before they died of old age. The operation led to hundreds of investigations and several convictions, though many suspects died before trials could be completed. Operation Last Chance offered rewards for information leading to the arrest of war criminals and launched publicity campaigns in countries where suspects were believed to be hiding. The operation identified dozens of suspects living in the United States, Canada, Australia, and South America. Many of these individuals had been living openly under their real names for decades. Some cases remained unsolved until the very end. Aribert Heim, known as Dr. Death for his medical experiments at concentration camps, was believed to have lived in Egypt under an assumed identity until his death in 1992. However, his fate wasn't confirmed until 2009, when German investigators finally tracked down evidence of his death. The search for Heim had lasted decades and spanned multiple continents. Investigators followed leads in Spain, Chile, Uruguay, and Egypt. They discovered that Heim had converted to Islam and lived in Cairo under the name Tariq Hussein Farid. His son later revealed that Heim had died of cancer in 1992, taking his secrets with him. Franz Stangl, the Treblinka commandant, was finally tracked down in Brazil in 1967. After years of legal battles, he was extradited to Germany and convicted of mass murder. During his trial, he maintained that he had only been following orders and claimed he had tried to make conditions at Treblinka more humane. He died in prison in 1971, shortly after his conviction. Gustav Wagner, the Beast of Sobibor, lived openly in Brazil for decades despite repeated extradition requests. Brazilian authorities consistently refused to surrender him, claiming he had acquired citizenship and couldn't be deported. Wagner lived comfortably on a farm until his death in 1980, when he was found dead in what authorities ruled a self-inflicted incident. The case of Hermine Braunsteiner, known as the Mayor of Majdanek, showed that female war criminals were also pursued. After living quietly as a housewife in New York for decades, she was identified by survivors and deported to Germany. Her trial in the 1970s was one of the first major prosecutions of concentration camp personnel and helped establish legal precedents for future cases. The hunt may be over, but the consequences of letting these criminals escape continue to haunt us today in ways most people never realize. The escape of Nazi war criminals after World War II is more than a historical footnote. It reveals how societies fail to confront justice and how extremist ideologies persist. Many fugitives showed no remorse and rebuilt lives in South America, where some helped establish neo-Nazi groups that exist today. Colonia Dignidad in Chile, founded by Nazi Paul Schaefer, became a hub of indoctrination, abuse, and collaboration with Pinochet's regime. Nazi beliefs were preserved and passed on, masked by a cult-like Christian facade and protected by Chilean authorities. Western intelligence agencies often prioritized Cold War strategy over justice, allowing many Nazis to evade prosecution. Stolen assets funded new lives and businesses. Some financial networks, possibly tied to figures like Martin Bormann, remain untraced and may still support extremist causes. Perhaps most disturbing was how easily these men integrated into society, aided by neighbors' silence. Survivors were left with enduring trauma, while the children of perpetrators now grapple with a legacy of guilt, denial, or painful reckoning. Educational efforts to document these escapes have revealed the extent to which Nazi ideology survived the war. Universities, museums, and research centers have worked to preserve testimony from survivors and document the networks that allowed war criminals to escape. This research has become crucial for understanding how extremist movements adapt and survive. The last major Nazi war criminal prosecutions took place in the 2010s, over 70 years after World War II. Most perpetrators died of old age, their secrets buried with them, but their legacy endures as a warning. Justice delayed can become justice denied. Those who fled Europe after 1945 carried not just guilt, but knowledge of torture, murder, and repression. Many found refuge in dictatorships that embraced their skills, contributing to atrocities across Latin America, including forced sterilizations, medical experiments, and political repression using Gestapo techniques. Their escape routes, rat lines, became models for modern criminal networks, human trafficking, money laundering, and identity fraud. Eichmann's capture in Argentina reminded the world that justice can still find those who run. While the Nazi manhunts are largely over, the need for justice remains urgent. These stories show how hate adapts, how impunity enables future crimes, and how the world must choose memory over forgetfulness. Survivors who pursued these criminals knew the truth. Evil doesn't fade, it evolves. Holding it accountable is the only way to stop it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.